In the farmlands of rural Minnesota lies a discovery so impossible, so deeply unsettling that when it first came to light, the entire academic world refused to believe it. A Swedish farmer, a frozen autumn morning, a tree being uprooted from the ground, and buried beneath its roots, a stone, not just any stone, a stone carved with ancient Norse runes, the same writing system used by Viking warriors, the same script that belongs to Scandinavia, not Minnesota. The inscription was long, it was deliberate, and it told a story so brutal, so desperate, so far from anything that should exist in the American heartland that historians still cannot agree on what to do with it. Because this stone does not just raise questions about who found it. It raises questions about everything we think we know, about who reached America first, and what happened to them when they got here. And here is the reason this matters. If this stone is real, then European explorers didn't just visit the coast of North America 1,000 years ago. They traveled 2,500 miles deep into the continent, into the wilderness of what is now the American Midwest. 130 years before Columbus ever set sail, that would rewrite every history book on Earth. But if it is a hoax, then someone, somewhere, pulled off the most elaborate, most brilliant, most perfectly executed deception in the history of American archaeology, and they did it so well that 125 years later, even the world's greatest experts still cannot fully prove it. Either answer is extraordinary. Either answer changes history. The stone is definitely still out there. Still sitting in a museum in Minnesota, still unresolved, still waiting. The story began the way most impossible discoveries do, with an ordinary man doing an ordinary thing. It was 1898. A Swedish immigrant named Olof Ohman was clearing land on his farm in Salem Township, Douglas County, Minnesota. He was pulling up tree stumps with his two young sons, 10-year-old Edward and 12-year-old Olaf Jr. Just another cold autumn morning of hard labor. They felled a stunted aspen tree using a winch. When the root ball came up from the earth, something came with it, tangled deep within the roots. Lying face down about 6 inches beneath the surface was a flat slab of gray stone. It was 10-year-old Edward who noticed it first. Something was covering one entire face of the stone, symbols, hundreds of them, carved in neat, deliberate lines across the surface. The stone measured roughly 31 inches tall, 16 inches wide, and 6 inches thick. It weighed 202 pounds, and the aspen tree's roots, measured at 3.5 inches wide and visibly flattened from years of growing across the stone's back, had completely enveloped it. Whatever this stone was, it had been buried here for a very long time. Ohman pulled it out of the earth, studied it, and reportedly declared he had found an Indian almanac. A curious description for a man who, as we would later discover, knew far more about what those symbols were than he ever admitted. To understand the depth of what was carved into this stone, you first need to understand what was actually written there. Runic script is an ancient writing system used by Germanic and Norse peoples, yet each symbol represents a sound. Together they form words. And the words carved into this Minnesota stone, translated with painstaking care by multiple scholars, told a story that should not exist. 9 lines on the flat face, 3 lines carved into the left edge. The translation reads, 8 Gotalanders and 22 Norwegians, on a journey of exploration from Vinland westward. We had camped by 2 skerries, 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were out fishing one day. After we came home, found 10 men red with blood and dead. A VM, save us from evil. And on the edge, we have 10 men by the sea to look after our ships, 14 days' journey from this island, year 1362. Let that settle for a moment. A party of 30 Scandinavians, 8 from Gotaland in southern Sweden, 22 from Norway, traveling west from Vinland, the Norse name for the northeastern coast of North America. They made camp, they went fishing, and when they came back, 10 of their companions had been slaughtered, found red with blood and dead. The survivors carved a desperate prayer, 3 Latin letters, a VM, Ave Virgo Maria, Hail Virgin Mary, a Catholic invocation of protection carved by Norse men in the heart of a continent no European should have reached. And then the date, carved in pentatic numerals at the bottom of the inscription, 1362, 130 years before Columbus. When the stone was brought to public attention in early 1899, rubbings of the inscription were sent to the greatest Scandinavian linguists in the world: Olof Ohman, Sophus Bugge, Gustav Storm, Magnus Olsson, Adolf Noreen, the most respected names in the field. In April of 1899, all 3 Oslo professors sent back a cable, a single devastating verdict. A clumsy forgery. The stone was packed up, shipped back to Minnesota, and Ohman, reportedly crushed by the rejection, did something extraordinary with what could have been the most important archaeological discovery in American history. He flung it beside his granary, where it sat for 8 years as a stepping stone. In the summer of 1907, a young Norwegian historian named Hjalmar Ruud Holland traveled to Minnesota researching Scandinavian settlements. He visited Ohman's farm. He saw the stone, and something in him refused to walk away. Holland left Kensington with the runestone. Whether Ohman gave it to him or sold it for $10, depending on which account you believe, is itself a mystery. But what followed was one of the most remarkable and controversial crusades in American archaeological history. For the next 56 years, until his death in 1963, Holland devoted his entire life to proving the stone was real. He published books, gave lectures, took the stone to Europe, placed it in front of scholars, scientists, historians, and curators around the world. And in 1948, he achieved what seemed like the ultimate validation. The Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. put the Kensington Runestone on display, and then again in 1965 at the New York World's Fair, where 187,471 visitors saw it with their own eyes. For a moment, it seemed like the stone had won. But the doubts never went away, and the closer scholars looked, the stranger things became. The most devastating argument against the Kensington Runestone is not about geology. It is not about who found it. It is about the words themselves. The inscription is, in the words of linguists, far too easy to read. Any modern Swedish speaker can understand it almost perfectly, which should be impossible. Genuine 14th century Old Swedish retained 4 grammatical cases, distinct plural verb forms, and a syntax almost unrecognizable to modern speakers. The Kensington inscription shows none of this. 0 case inflection, modern singular verb forms, a vocabulary that reads like contemporary Swedish, not medieval Norse. And there is one word that destroys the 1362 date entirely. The inscription uses the compound word opdagelsefard, meaning voyage of discovery. This word does not appear in any Scandinavian text before the 16th century. It derives from a chain of borrowings from French to German to Low German to Scandinavian, a linguistic chain that simply did not exist in 1362. The word was not invented yet. No one in the 14th century could have written it. Uppsala University runologist Henrik Williams, the world's leading authority on Scandinavian runes, examined the inscription and gave his verdict in 2012. In my best judgment as an expert in the field, I cannot find that the inscription looks like any medieval Scandinavian text I have ever seen. The language alone, according to the world's greatest expert, should not exist in 1362. And yet, something else was discovered that made the mystery even stranger. The Kensington inscription uses 7 rune forms that appear in no known medieval runic alphabet, 7 symbols that scholars could not find anywhere in the historical record. For over a century, this was considered proof of forgery. A forger, critics said, had simply invented symbols they didn't understand. But in 2004, something extraordinary happened in a dialect archive in Umeå, Sweden. Researchers discovered the personal papers of a journeyman tailor named Edward Larsson, who lived from 1867 to 1950. In his papers, dated 1883 and 1885, were practice sheets, runic alphabets that contained almost exactly the non-standard rune forms from the Kensington stone, including the pentatic numeral system, including the very symbols that scholars had said could not have been known by any 19th century forger. But it gets stranger. Edward Larsson's aunt had emigrated to Crooked Lake, Minnesota in 1870. It's a town just miles from Alexandria, just miles from where the stone was found. And then, in 2019, 2 short runic inscriptions were found carved in a farmhand's room in Kulchen village, Sweden, dated 1870 and 1877, using runes that closely matched the Kensington forms. That village was not far from Ohman's home parish of Forsa. And in 2020, Swedish archaeologist Mats G. Larsson discovered that Ohman's cousin, his childhood friend, Anna Ersson, had lived in Kulchen in 1878. Ohman had proposed marriage to her in 1879. The man who found the stone had grown up, proposed marriage, and maintained family connections in the exact Swedish village where this non-standard runic tradition existed. The runes that should have been impossible to know were in his neighborhood. The investigation into Ohman himself produced details that were, at best, deeply uncomfortable for believers in the stone's authenticity. Ohman was described locally as, in the words of his neighbors, a queer genius who carved runes on sidewalks, window casings, and the walls of his granary. His library was examined, and what was found in it changed the entire picture. He owned a copy of Den Kunskapsrika Skolmästaren, The Well-Informed Schoolmaster, published in 1881, a book that contained detailed descriptions of rune types, how rune stones were made, and where they were found in Scandinavia. The book was signed by Ohman himself, dated March 2nd, 1891, 8 years before the discovery. He also owned a history of Sweden containing runic alphabets, signed at Kensington in 1898, the same year the stone appeared. And his close friend and neighbor, a defrocked Swedish pastor named Sven Fogelblad, who had studied theology at Uppsala University, owned a grammar containing a full runic alphabet. Fogelblad died in 1897, 1 year before the stone surfaced. If Fogelblad helped create the inscription and then died, taking the secret with him, the timing becomes difficult to explain away. For decades, supporters of the stone's authenticity pointed to the geology as their strongest evidence. Forensic geologist Scott Wolter examined the stone in 2000. He used reflected light microscopy, core sampling, and scanning electron microscope analysis. His central finding? A mineral called biotite mica, the fastest weathering mineral in the stone's composition, had completely disappeared from the inscribed surfaces. Comparing this to dated stone samples, he concluded the inscription was older than 200 years. For a moment, science seemed to be on the stone's side. But in 2020, geologist Harold Edwards published a landmark paper in the Minnesota Archaeologist, and what he found was the opposite. The inscription, he concluded, was about as sharp as the day it was carved, with virtually no weathering consistent with 600 years of age. He compared the stone to 61-year-old marble tombstones in Minnesota. The Kensington inscription showed similar or less weathering than grave markers from the 1950s. And then there was the mark left by Holland himself. Around 1910, the historian had carved a small H onto the stone as an identification mark. When scientists examined the patina on that modern H carving, it looked almost identical to the patina on the original runes. Comparable age, a mark carved in 1910. Indistinguishable in surface weathering from symbols supposedly carved in 1362. And yet, for all of this, for all the linguistic problems and geological evidence in suspicious library books, the historical context refuses to be dismissed entirely, because something real was happening in Scandinavia in 1362. In November of 1354, King Magnus Eriksson of Sweden and Norway issued a royal letter. It commissioned a man named Paul Knutson, a law officer in Bergen, to lead an expedition to Greenland. Reports had reached the crown that the Western settlement had abandoned Christianity, that people were disappearing. The reason they were disappearing was this. The Black Death had arrived in Norway in 1349 and killed an estimated 60% of the population. The sea routes to Greenland were becoming impossible. The Norse colonies there, founded by Eric the Red around 985 CE and once home to thousands of people, were dying. The composition of the Knutson Commission, Gotalanders from southern Sweden and Norwegians, 8 Gotalanders and 22 Norwegians, the exact people described on the Kensington stone, the exact number. The year 1362 falls precisely within the window when such an expedition could have taken place. Some supporters theorized the party sailed to Greenland, found the western settlement already abandoned, followed trails west to Vinland, and then pushed through Hudson Strait into Hudson Bay, up the Nelson River to Lake Winnipeg, and south through the Red River system into central Minnesota, a journey of nearly 9,000 miles. There is, however, one problem. There's no record that the Knutson expedition ever actually sailed. The 1354 Commission is the only document that mentions it. Whether ships were built, whether men were gathered, whether anyone ever left Bergen Harbor, unknown. The surrounding evidence made the mystery even more difficult to resolve. No other artifacts were found near the stone, no tools, no campsites, no Norse weapons, no human remains, no signs of habitation in the area dated to the 14th century. The only confirmed Norse archaeological site in North America remains L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, discovered in 1960, precisely dated in 2021 using cosmic ray wood analysis to the year 1021 CE. A seasonal base camp with a smithy, iron slag, and hundreds of artifacts, 341 years before the Kensington date, 2,000 miles away. And no new archaeological evidence of Norse presence anywhere in the American interior has been found between 2020 and today. There are also the other contested artifacts. The Newport Tower in Rhode Island, claimed by some to be Viking. Radiocarbon dated to between 1635 and 1698. The main penny, a genuine Norse coin dated to 1067 CE, found in a Native American settlement, most likely traded through indigenous networks from Newfoundland, not carried there by Vikings. The Beardmore relics, genuine 10th century Norse weapons found in Ontario, were confirmed to have been planted by the discoverer's own son. And the AVM runestone, found near the Kensington site in 2001 and initially treated as possible corroborating evidence, was revealed in 2001 to be a prank carved in 1985 by 2 University of Minnesota graduate students who confessed 16 years later. Everything around the Kensington stone kept dissolving into fraud, but the stone itself refuse to fully dissolve. What is often forgotten in the academic arguments about runes and geology and linguistics is the human story at the center of all of this. Olof Ohman never profited from the discovery, never sought fame, never claimed anything dramatic. When the experts dismissed the stone in 1899, he threw it on the ground and walked away. When journalists pressed him for decades afterward, he reportedly said only this: "I wish I never found the darn stone." When skeptics challenged him, he pushed back quietly. "Why would I bury it under a tree if I made it? Wouldn't I have just put it in the field where someone could find it?" The toll on his family was severe. 2 of his children later died by suicide. His eldest daughter Amanda's death in 1951 was reportedly connected to the decades of harassment and ridicule the family endured. His youngest son Arthur, in his old age in a nursing home, was a man visitors were told never to ask about the runestone. If Ohman made this stone as a hoax, he spent 40 years being publicly humiliated and watched his family destroyed and never once admitted it, never once sought to profit, and died in 1935, still maintaining the same quiet silence. Either he was the most committed hoaxer in the history of archaeology, or he was a man who found something real and was never believed. While the Kensington Runestone has been displayed at the Runestone Museum in Alexandria, Minnesota since 1958, 202 pounds of gray Greywalkie sandstone sitting behind plexiglass, still carrying the carved prayer of 30 men who may or may not have been here. Outside in the park across the street stands a 28-foot fiberglass Viking named Big Ol, built for the 1965 World's Fair. His shield reads, "Alexandria, birthplace of America." The question mark that was originally included was quietly removed before shipping. The town has built its entire identity around this stone. A local brewery is named 22 Northman after the inscription. The town calls itself the birthplace of America. The museum draws thousands of visitors every year. In 2021, the Science Channel aired a series investigating the mystery. In 2022, a rock musical called Runestone premiered at the History Theater in St. Paul, written by a Kensington native whose grandfather had known Ohman personally. He grew up, as he described it, in a mixed household. His grandfather believed Ohman was honest. His father was certain it was a hoax. That is perhaps the perfect summary of where this mystery stands. Still dividing families, still unresolved, after 125 years. What makes the Kensington Runestone remarkable is not only the inscription itself, it is the question underneath the question. Because the world's leading runologist, Henrik Williams, the man who knows more about Scandinavian runes than anyone alive, looked at the stone and said something that has never been fully answered. Even though the case for a 14th century origin still leaves much to be desired, the case for a 19th century origin is not complete. Not complete. The man most qualified on earth to dismiss this stone declined to fully dismiss it. Human journeys often go unrecorded. People cross oceans and forests and continents and leave behind nothing. No documents, no maps, no confirmed trace in the historical record. Only occasionally a stone. In 1362, if the inscription is believed, 10 men were found red with blood and dead on the edge of a lake in what would one day become Minnesota. Their companions, outnumbered and terrified, carved their names and numbers and a prayer into the nearest rock they could find. And then they walked back toward the sea, 14 days away, toward ships that may or may not have been waiting, and whether or not they were really there, someone carved that prayer in a forest in Minnesota, 500 years before it was found. The stone still lies where it was placed, its carved symbols worn faintly smooth under museum light, still waiting for an answer that, after 125 years of science and argument and obsession, has never come. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can like, subscribe, share, and leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We would love to hear what you think happened in that Minnesota forest in 1362.